Can you convey the heart of the gospel in just 10 words? Our guest can. Let's talk about it with J.D. Greear on Steve Brown, etc.
He's an old white guy, an author, broadcaster, and seminary professor who's sick of religion. And he's brought friends. Please welcome Steve Brown, etc.
And we're so glad you're here. You always have a seat at our table. That you would take an hour out of a busy schedule and be with us is a high and holy compliment, and we see it as that. If you're wondering, I'm Steve, the aforementioned old white guy. Matthew Porter is here. He's our executive producer. You just got back from a doctor's visit.
Yeah, went well. I was going through the process with the nurse and the procedure and everything, and she said, now this next part, you might feel a little pressure. I said, oh, okay. She goes, so what are you doing with your life? I mean, like, really? You're closing in on 50. I'm like, that's a little more pressure than I thought. But all right.
Our producer, Jinx, is in his little glass booth. He's always cool under pressure.
Most of the time, yes.
What are you going to do with the
know.
rest of your life?
I'm going to do this, Steve. I like doing that.
I'm going to play doctor.
You don't see him, but you do see what he does. Our video director and one-man IT department, John Myers, is in his tech bunker. And finally, Kathy's not here. She's on vacation in Maine. Dr. George Bingham is here, however. He's the president of Key Life. George was gone yesterday because it was President's Day.
No, I get it, yeah.
But also because
41st anniversary.
Outstanding.
41
Congrats.
years.
Good job.
Yeah, and they said it wouldn't last.
Man.
You know, nobody I know or knew in those days did last.
Yeah.
And they thought we would be the first to die as a marriage. And we've been married a lot longer than you have.
Yeah.
Because I'm a lot older than
And
you.
why?
Well, and one of the really good signs is we don't have to plan anything other than being together for the day. So,
I get it.
Well played.
which I really appreciate.
Love it.
But 1 second, back to Kathy. Why would you go to Maine in the wintertime?
She's crazy.
I mean-
she likes it.
I would go in July when we don't want to bring
His
here.
lobsters back or
She
something.
Well,
could do that.
her
You
mother-
better be nice to her.
Her mother is buried on a farm up there, and
Yeah.
she goes through the snow out to the place, and it's kind of sad. But she absolutely loves Maine. If she has tried to talk me into moving this Key Life network to Maine for years, but it's not going to happen. I just want you- Hey, our guest is great. We've had him before, J.D. Greear. And J.D., we were talking about what does J.D. stand for. Jesus do, Jinx said. Or Jesus disciple, you suggested, but it's something different, isn't it?
Well, I feel like I should have some grand story about, my parents being alcoholics when I was born, and then named me Jack Daniels, and then they changed it to Jesus. I mean, I feel like it's right for a great story, but it's James David. James is a family name, and they like David, but then they wanted to call me something different. So from the time I was born, my mom looked at me in the little crib as an infant and said, that's JD. So it's stuck.
Shoot, that's more pedestrian than I thought I was going to discover when I asked you that question. By the way, J.D. Greear serves as pastor of Summit Church in Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, where my late uncle was a bank embezzler. I have that's true, heritage. And he's the founder of J.D. Greear Ministries. He also hosts Summit Life, a daily broadcast and weekly TV program, and the Ask Me Anything podcast. Do you mean that? Can they ask you
just did.
anything they want to?
He's not committed to answering everything. He
Yeah,
just says,
it's
ask
not-
me
it's not,
anything.
I'll answer you anything. I'm
Yeah.
like, you can ask me anything.
You already used up your question.
Listen, JD has written 10 books, and the latest, which I hold in my nicotine-stained fingers, is titled Essential Christianity, the Heart of the Gospel in 10 Words. You're kidding.
Man. We'll get out of here in time
Spoiler
for
alert.
lunch.
It's actually more than 10 total words.
I mean, it seems like it should be
10
shorter.
subject heading words.
It seemed like a thicker book than that. And I thought, he
Like
must
we could
have-
just cover the whole thing in the first segment and be done with it, right?
Let's go to
Yeah,
Chili's.
you know, it's well, I was gonna say it's using the points of Paul's logic in the book of Romans and condensing them into 10 kind of categorical words and say these are the movements of gospel logic that have appealed to people for 2,000 years, whether they're, in a dusty street in Jerusalem or whether they're in a corporate high rise in Manhattan.
Listen, I loved what you said about it with the lady in California. I forget her name. That if you spend over $1,000, you and people you can be with her for an hour.
That's
and
right.
That's not for sexual things. That's for religious stuff. And
Yeah, it's people pay. I think it's $1,111 an hour, so that they can connect with Jesus, a Jesus who channels through this very popular medium, and it's kind of her clientele are the who's who of Hollywood. Uma Thurman and Jennifer Aniston, and her Jesus Jesus she believes channels through her and speaks to people, and her Jesus has a British accent, which I've always found curious. That not. I mean, I guess even Jesus recognizes that when Americans hear a British accent, they automatically add 15 points to your IQ. So
and if
he speaks
you're
through-
a pastor and have a British accent, it's worth $5,000 more a year.
That's
Anyway, go ahead.
I hear. So unfortunately, you get Southern with me, but anyway, yeah, it's just, but it speaks to like this hunger that people have to really connect with the divine, even in uber secular Hollywood.
When you started the book, we have a tendency, if you read much, that we're has-beens, that it's over, that we need to have a funeral for the Christian faith. You don't see it that way, do you?
No, I mean, some of it is experiential. I do pastor a church. God has graciously allowed me to be a part of a church that the majority are young professionals, college students, a lot of people that society would say, and some of those books say, no longer are interested in the Christian faith. By God's grace, we see scores of them, hundreds, I might even say thousands, that repent and put faith in Christ. And so, some of it I've just seen. Some of it is just an awareness of the power of the gospel in my own heart. When you experience the power of the gospel and you see it transform you, it's no longer a question of the efficacy of the product. You're just like, and that's what Paul is just beaming with in Romans, where he says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ because it is the dunamis. That's the Greek word where we get our word dynamite. It's the power of God unto salvation. And you think about, like, yes, I realize we're intimidated when we see the secular world around us, but Paul had more reason to be intimidated because this is a little, kind of backwoods, upstart religion, in everybody's mind, that's coming from a dusty corner in Palestine. And Paul is going to Rome, which is the unquestioned capital of the world, militarily, philosophically, economically. It's the capital. And Paul says, I know that this gospel that transformed this guy is also going to be able to transform those who believe, no matter where they're from.
I've always thought that sociology was the moral equivalent of looking at the entrails of chickens to determine the future. But you make some rather corrective statements to the sociologists who have predicted we're going to see less religion.
Yeah, but forget sociologists even. I mean, maybe you haven't read that many sociology books, listeners thinking, but you probably heard the John Lennon, lead singer of the Beatles, who he said this back in the 60s, that, within his lifetime, he said that all forms of kind of organized religion would be dead. And it's true, Steve. I mean, let's be honest. A lot of interest in certain types of organized religion is waning. There's a whole movement called deconstruction, where people are questioning the motives of a lot of the institutions that have been built. And so I don't think it's wise or truthful to just, dismiss all that as poppycock. But I do recognize that it's well documented that alongside this kind of questioning of authority and questioning of those things, there's this increasing interest in spirituality and in truth and in God. That is at an all-time high. And one of the guys I quote him in the book. He was writing for the USA Today newspaper, and he said all the predictions on this have not come true, because nobody told the millennials and the Gen Zers that they should not be looking for God. He said they are more curious. They're seeking more than maybe any other generation. And so that's why I wanted to be able to provide something that said, look, here's the oldest, most powerful book ever written on the gospel. The book that has been behind every great awakening in America. It is the book that's been behind the reformations that have taken place in the church for 2,000 years. And say, what does it sound like to a 21st century American?
And we're going to pursue that on the other side of the break. But first, this is really hard work. It looks like it's easy, but it's not. We're professionals, and we work hard at it. So we'll get some cookies and milk, rest up, and see you later. So glad you're here. We're talking with one of our favorite people, J.D. Greear, and he's an author, theologian, etc. We call him His Eminence. His latest book is titled Essential Christianity, The Heart of the Gospel in 10 Words. And my initial reaction to him was, you're kidding.
JD, before the break, you touched on something that was really encouraging. This idea of, people were supposed to have grown past religion by now, and especially the younger generation. And nobody happened to TikTok that to them or something, because, they didn't seem to get the message. And it made me immediately think of, if anybody's watching the NFL playoffs, and there's a player, Damar Hamlin, who got a horrific injury. They carted him out in an ambulance, and then for the ensuing 2 hours, everybody was talking about, we need to pray for Damar Hamlin, and all of a sudden everybody's very cool with talking about praying, and
and they nailed, the staff and coaches and players were kneeling on the field.
Yeah, it's very funny how it only takes a couple things to happen. All of a sudden, you're not necessarily out of the believing in God game. And you speak in the book, you talk about the book is not just speaking to believers, it's also speaking to unbelievers, and there's a message for each of them. I wonder if you could unpack that a little bit about what the book has to say to each of these different groups.
Yeah, great question. Actually, I'd love to make a comment on the first thing you said before I answer that question, because it reminded me of something C.S. Lewis used to always say about the growth of unbelief, in our scientific age. He said, no matter how hard you try, no matter how much you tell your head, your heart still knows the truth about God. And he said the way that you can see that is how you react in times of great joy or times of great sadness or fear. And he used the example of, if you're trying to see if you have rats in your cellar, if you, make a lot of noise and go down really slowly, by the time you get in the cellar, there'll be no rats there. But if you sneak down in there in the total darkness and then flip on a light, you'll see them everywhere. Yeah. If you had rats in your cellar. He said that's what belief in God is like. He said, we posture ourselves so that we act like I don't need this, but the moment life startles us with either great joy or great tragedy, all of a sudden out comes this thing that we've known all along. And that's kind of Paul's point in Romans, is that I'm not trying to convince your head of something new. I'm trying to get you to acknowledge what you know to be true. And that is that there is a God of glory and power who has created you. The question you asked specifically, how it's interesting, because you would think that the gospel is what you would say mainly to an unbeliever. That's like the entry right into Christianity, the ABCs, the diving board off of which you jump into the pool of Christianity. And it certainly is. But Paul writes the book of Romans, the clearest explanation of the gospel anywhere. He writes it to Christians. You look at the first few verses of Romans, it's clear who his audience is. And when he says it's the power of God to salvation, he doesn't just mean to unbelievers. He also means the ongoing power in your life comes not from going beyond the gospel. The ongoing power in the believer's life comes from going deeper into the gospel. Martin Luther, reflecting on the book of Romans, he said the gospel is like a well. If you want to get the best water out of a well, you don't widen the circumference of the well. The best water will be found if you go deeper into the well. And so what Paul does is he takes you into the depths of just who God is, who you are without God, who you are in God, after you've been reconciled to him. And the more that he opens your eyes to see the glories of who Jesus is, you suddenly become more on fire for him. I love the phrase that the way, the fire to do in the Christian life comes from being soaked in the fuel of what has been done. What I find is that when you really preach the gospel, just really unpack the beauty of it, not only are unbelievers drawn to Christ, but believers are propelled to go farther and brighter for Christ. And I think you get all that from the very first chapter of Romans.
What is the gospel? In one sentence or two.
Or
then
10
I
words.
know you wrote the book. I get that. But just so if Joe Pagan or Jane Sinek is watching or listening, they're confused with that word. So you can just say good news if you want to. If you want to expand on it, that'd be all right too.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. And that's one, Steve, I appreciate it, because I feel like a lot of people assume it, or they assume they know what it means, and they never really get to it. It does mean good news. That is the old time, if you go back to the original Greek, it wasn't even a religious word. Greek generals would use the word gospel to announce a victory. And they would send out a gospel proclamation to the nation that says, I have won a battle. That wasn't an invitation for you to come and fight for them. It was just an announcement that they had won a battle on your behalf, and that you were now at peace. You no longer had to live in fear. And so the gospel writers, the New Testament gospel writers, Jesus picked up on that word and said, that's essentially what God is doing for you. Is God has won a battle on your behalf, and he's not inviting you to come and wage the battle for him as if it's not already finished. He's inviting you to live in the new reality of what he has accomplished for you, by dying for your sin on the cross, and then by overcoming death by rising again. There's a sentence I use as sort of a guide for the book. It's in the first chapter. It's just this: God, in an act of grace, sent his son Jesus to earth as a man, that through his life, death, and resurrection, he could rescue us, reign as king, and lead us into the eternal full life that we were created to enjoy. That's the gospel. That's in a sentence. And then Paul spends a book now just saying this is the beauty and the power of the whole Christian life.
Oh, that works. In fact, I've been thinking about becoming a Christian. And you almost did it.
And we've been so hoping, it would add a little bit of credibility to his preaching. JD, you talk about a situation, for people from the South in that spiritual experience of visiting a Waffle House. You kind of introduce with a story there for the philosophically minded that might be tuning in. What are those? Paul covers the basic philosophical arguments for the existence of God and our connection with him. Can you kind of review those?
Yeah, that's great. It's basically whether you're sitting in a Waffle House and you never graduated high school, or you're sitting in the White House and you were there with a PhD from Harvard or Yale, your soul has the same basic questions. and the same basic evidences. And one of those evidences is the fact that you see this incredible design in creation, the fact that you long for meaning, the fact that there's a sense of guilt. That's the animal kingdom doesn't have that kind of sense of guilt about its actions. The fact that there is the fact that there are things like love and a desire for significance.
I asked too big of a question. Maybe we need to finish that on the other side.
Great, sounds great.
Yeah.
You had me at Waffle House.
I am so hungry.
I am too. But if you're hungry for what JD's been talking about, you maybe ought to investigate it. You might be surprised at the gospel. You might find that it resonates with you, not because it's cool, but because it's true. Don't go anywhere. Hey, we're so glad you're with us. And if you've been listening, you are so glad you're with us. We're hanging out with J.D. Greear. If you want to keep up with him, you can go to J.D. Greear. And he spells his last name kind of weird. It's Greear.
The liberal arts degree, probably.
Bonus A at no cost.
J.D. Greear, spelling it the way I just instructed you.
That's right.
.com. And at Twitter at J.D. Greear.
This is, Steve, I'm going to interrupt you. I'll tell you, this is more time we got for here, but one of my friends at Ancestry.com informed me that my original ancestor that came to America spelled it the normal way, EER. One of my ancestors changed it in the mid-19th century for no reason to add the extra A. And the person at Ancestry said that's because they were trying to evade the law.
Excellent.
So that's what I've got in my past. You got your bank fraud person. I've got that. So they might have known each other.
Great heritage, by the way, for a preacher.
I thought maybe they were trying to spell it phonetically for anticipating you moving to the South.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, I have to put an extra syllable in
There we
there.
are.
JD, before the break, I artfully left you about 45 seconds to go through the philosophical arguments that Paul includes in Romans to the unbeliever. And you can start from the beginning, but I think those more philosophically oriented would be interested in those.
Yeah, I appreciate you re-asking that. The basic idea is whether you're in the Waffle House or sitting in the White House, you've got the same basic questions that your heart asks and that are evidences. Don't think of these as like proofs, where we're trying to really press somebody into a corner and force them to, admit that there's no other logical answer. They're like echoes and hints. They're very simple. Philosophers have unhelpfully given them very complicated names, but I'm like, look, if you can memorize, 16-part $8 drinks at Starbucks, and you can learn the names of these. The cosmological argument is one of the ones that Paul says, it alludes to in Romans 1, and it's basically, why is there something rather than nothing? I mean, nothing times nobody can't equal everything. Even if you espouse the Big Bang, at some point you have to ask why. Where did the original materials for the Big Bang come from? Why is there something rather than nothing? Then there's what philosophers call the teleological argument, and that's the evidence of design. Just, when you look at things, you recognize whether you're looking in the man-made world or the natural world, you recognize when there's a design in something. And so the more you look through your telescope and your microscope, the more you see it just screams there's something intelligent behind this. The third, the one that Paul alludes to is what we call the moral fingerprint, which is the fact that there is a sense that pervades cultures and times of a right and a wrong. just the concept of right and wrong. That's unique to humans. It's not present in the animal kingdom. Things that we know instinctively because we are made in God's image. The fourth one that Paul alludes to is the desire fingerprint, and the echo of desire, which is I know that I'm more than just an accident of biology. I know that there's something that I'm creative for, that when I talk about love and consciousness, this is not just a big cosmic illusion. And those are the things that God puts into creation. I love what one philosopher says, it's what we can't not know. It's not something we have to learn. It's just, it and you try. But what Paul says in Romans is that none of us are ignorant of the truth. What we do is we suppress the truth. And in ungodliness, we suppress the truth. Suppression of the truth is not the same thing as ignorance. Ignorance means you don't know it. Suppression means it's in there and you're trying to keep it down. Yeah. So I'm not saying there are no genuinely convinced atheists. There are. But ultimately, Paul says that's a heart problem of a heart that is postured against God, that chooses to believe what it wants to believe rather than what the evidence plainly says is true about creation.
That is such good stuff. Would you repeat it? Did you, when you were working on this book, if you're a preacher, you've taught Romans a lot. And but somebody has said preachers preach for themselves more than anybody else. As you worked on this book, did it have an existential side to it to you? Or was it just trying to figure out how to say something that you knew? Or did it get to you?
Yeah, very astute question, Steve. That's you can tell you've probably done a lot of this yourself, because it is true that the act of trying to communicate things takes it to a depth in you that is totally, the best way to help somebody else grow in their relationship with Jesus, or best way you can grow in your own relationship with Jesus, is to help somebody else out with theirs. Yeah. And so, yes, as I got into this, it was like, it was an experience that you have with God that totally changes you. It turned out not to be an academic thing. It turned out to be something for me that was, I don't know. I look back on this as almost a watershed moment in my life. There's a reason that every great awakening in America has come from study of the book of Romans. Yeah. And it was no exception for me.
Oh, man. That is such good stuff. And JD has just said that very soon he'll be entirely sanctified and will no longer go on programs like this. If you believe that, you'll believe anything. By the way, the book is Essential Christianity, the Heart of the Gospel in 10 Words. This is a book you need to read, maybe study in your small group at church, but it's a book where you need to get stacks of them and give them to every friend you've got, especially the ones who think you're a religious fanatic. And you'll rise up and call J.D. Greear blessed for that. Talking with J.D. Greear, and he's a wonderful author, a great preacher, and he doesn't talk with an accent, which is refreshing, too. You ought to get this book. It's Essential Christianity, the Heart of the Gospel in 10 Words. It'll bless you, but you need to, don't keep it in your library. Give it to somebody. Now, JD's not happy with my saying that. He would rather you buy it as a gift because he needs the money. But make sure that all your friends get a copy of this too.
JD, we've been talking for 45 some odd minutes about your book, and I don't want the clock to run out before we get to the actual subtitle, which is The Heart of the Gospel in 10 Words. You have put a big premise forward on this. Wondered, will you tell us a little bit, what are the words, It's on the cover, so you're not giving anything away. Just
Yeah, and we're going to count too.
Yeah.
So don't screw this up.
Oh, that's a lot of
let's
pressure.
pop the hood on this thing.
I do want to say, Steve, I appreciate just to your comment. I want listeners to feel good if they do buy the book that I have agreed to dedicate all the proceeds to feed hungry children. Their names are Karis, Allie, Ryan, and Adden. They're in my home right now. They need to go to college.
It's a worthy cause.
The question, I appreciate you asking that, because the idea was that even though the book of Romans is a letter written to an actual group of people in the first century, that the fundamental questions of human nature, they don't really change. Paul's logic in the book of Romans is meticulous. In fact, it's fascinating to me that for the first 100 or so years of Harvard Law School training lawyers, they would use the book of Romans as an example. They would all study it to see how Paul anticipates objections and then either diffuses or answers the objection in it. And so these 10 words represent the high points of Paul's logic. And we say, look, this is the same logic you would need to use with a 21st century American when you're talking to them about the gospel. I'll give you a quick little snapshot of them. Like you say, they're on the cover there. The first one is the word announcement. That's what Paul says. The gospel is fundamentally an announcement, not about what you need to go and do for God, but an announcement of what he's done for you. The second is undeniable. We've also talked about that in this hour in our program here, that the truth about God is not that we're ignorant of it. It's that we've always known it. And at some point we acknowledge to ourselves that we've always known it. And the third word is refusal. That's the posture of the human heart toward the revelation, toward the beauty of God we see around us, is we are not inclined to submit to God. We have a heart that it leans away from God. It's curved inward on itself, and it denies the truths that are out there, whether that's through false religion or whether it's through disobedience or whether it's through atheism. The fourth word or kind of word is religion, with the word marked out, because the number one way people respond to the awareness of God is they try to earn their way into his presence, to be good enough to earn his favor. And Paul spends 2 chapters just saying there's not a one of us, whether we believe the right things about God or not, there's not a one of us that can earn our way back into God's presence, which sets us up for the fifth word, which is rescue. Christianity is fundamentally a rescue religion. It's about God coming to do for you what you could not do for yourself. The sixth word is faith. Paul explains what is the faith that saves, and how do you know that you have it? Maybe you're somebody that's like, I think I have faith. Do I have enough faith? Have I asked Jesus into my heart enough? So Paul really explains, here's what it means. Here's what saving faith is, and how to know that you have it. The seventh word is inclusion. People today, they're like, I don't want to believe something that's exclusive because that makes me feel like, I sound like I'm smarter than everybody. And what Paul explains in Romans is like, listen, all truth claims are exclusive, but the gospel is the most inclusive exclusivity there is, because it shows us that the reason God accepts us has nothing to do with us or how smart we are, or how good we are. It's a gift he offers to people everywhere. The eighth word is struggle. And that's basically the question Paul answers of, if Christianity is true, why does the Christian life feel so hard? Well, why is it so difficult? Even after knowing, I've been a Christian now for several decades. Why is it still so hard for me? The ninth word is spirit. Paul says that the thing that you yearn for is a relationship with God in spirit. And he shows us in Romans 8 what true encounters with the actual divine spirit is like, how to recognize it when it happens, and then how to facilitate it happening in your life. And the 10th word is the word therefore. Paul hits Romans 12, and he says, in light of all these incredible things about God and the gospel, therefore, this is what your relationship should look like. This is how your self-image should look like. This is what your goals in life, what you're going to pursue in life. These are all the things that come out of the therefore of the gospel. And those are the 10 words that Paul says, these are the things that shape ultimately not just your encounter with God, but how you think about yourself and how you think about your future.
And I think it has to be mentioned that on paper, you're creating kind of a modern interpretation, understanding of Romans, very theological. but it reads so it's as enjoyable and breezy as this conversation. So like if anybody's like, well, I'm not a theology nerd, it's like no. If Dum Dum Matthew, if Dum Dum Matthew can get into this thing, it's very accessible, which is no small achievement.
I appreciate you saying that because I've always wanted to be like Jonathan Edwards or Tim Keller for middle school students. Those are great theologians. Like put the cookies down there on the bottom shelf.
That's all. Listen, we got one more minute, JD, and we always ask our guests to be profound, to say something that will change the world. So if you should die right after this broadcast, people would remember you for these words. Now, I don't want to put any pressure on you, but you got a minute.
Might feel a little pressure.
You got
a minute. I was nervous, Steve, coming onto this because I'm like, Steve's guests are normally like, they're all stars. And my wife said, don't try to be smart, witty, funny. Just be yourself. And so I don't know what that means. But, there's a phrase I actually used in the book, comes from a missionary named C.T. Studd. He was the probably greatest professional athlete at the end of the into the 19th century. And C.T. Studd had this famous statement explaining why he left to go preach the gospel in obscurity in China and India, walking away from a lucrative sports career. And he said, famous words, "Only one life to live will soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last." My dad used to repeat that to me just ad nauseum when I was a kid. Son, there's only two things in life that last forever: the word of God and the souls of people. Make sure you build your life around both of those. The gospel is the message that makes the difference in eternity for every person that's ever walked the face of the earth. There's nothing more important to focus your life on, to give your life, to not just experience yourself, but to make sure everybody in your circle, everybody in your family, all your friends, everybody in our world has a chance to hear it and respond to it before they die.
So you did it. We want to applaud. Hey, JD, thanks for being with us. Hope we can do this again. You're a gift.
Yeah, me too.
Guys,
I love it. Thank you for having me on.
Guys, we're going to come back for a little bit after the break. And Kathy's not here. I trust that she told Matthew or somebody who's going to be our guest next week.
Not me.
Oh, well, whoever it'll be famous. Hey, what a good hour. We like JD a lot because he's crazier than we are, and it's a really good fit. And this is a really good book. You ought to get it. It's one of the best witnessing tools that I know about. We sent out, and we're going to have him on pretty soon, his letter to the church, Eric Metaxas. But he has an inability to write a book under 1,000 pages. And so we sent out to some of our people the book on atheism, Is Atheism Dead, or something like that. And the responses I get is, you're kidding. I'm not going to do that. That's too much. I'm not dedicating my life to reading one stupid book. But J.D. Greear gets it. In a wonderful and very thoughtful way that you'll like, he presents the gospel. And actually, that's what we're here for. We're here for them, not us. It's settled with us. The hard part for us is not to be arrogant or insufferable because we're king's kids, because we're forgiven. We don't have to feel guilty anymore. We don't have anything to defend. We don't have to push anything anymore. It's a very freeing walk, and it's settled. We could go to heaven right now and it'd be all right, except for them. And them is a big deal. And that's why we're around. And one of the best ways you can do that is to keep it simple, to say, all right, we have classes on evangelism, a week-long class on how to share your faith. Man, it doesn't take a brain surgeon. You're really screwed up, and you need a Savior, and He'll be that if you go to Him. That's it. The gospel for them. All right. You checked, and you now know.
I do.
Who's going to be on next week?
Next week, we're going to speak with a best-selling author named Larry Loftus. He's kind of carved out this niche of doing historical books that particularly look at people involved with either like spies or some kind of subterfuge or that kind of covert kind of story. Yeah. And he's done a definitive biography on Corrie ten Boom. He says her own book only covers a tiny fraction of her life. His book takes a much bigger, more all-in view, so it should be a good time.
It'll be great. I met Corrie ten Boom, had lunch with her just before she died, and I love this book. So you be here next week, same time, same place, and between now and then, don't do anything we wouldn't. That gives you a wide, wide berth.
Feels like a show.
Yeah.
We should try this on a regular basis.
In fact, if we all did it in unison,
Right?
wide berth.
That looks like picking up a
How to do
collection.
it. It's easy.
Feels culty. I like it.